And we are live. Good morning, everybody. How are we doing out there? It is Thursday, the day after April 1st. So welcome to Human Services Consulting and Training. We are talking today about leading remote teams through conflict. This is going to be a little bit of a different topic for us, a little bit of a different approach for us. So I'm going to make a couple of points early. I'm going to go through my introduction, my usual, what are we going to cover? Why is this important? Usual kind of stuff. I'm going to show you a couple of resources that I think would be very helpful for you that I'm going to recommend. And then I'm going to talk about where we're going with the future of these videos, what future content will be, and sort of what our future plans are as we go. Now, as you're watching live, if you would like to comment, we would love that. Please do so. This is a tough topic, and so I expect that a lot of you will view what I'm doing here, probably won't necessarily contribute, and that's okay, actually. This is one of those topics where there's a lot of things mixed up inside of conflict, and there's a lot of different dynamics. And now that we are all remote, or at least a lot of us are remote, it becomes even more difficult sometimes to be able to handle areas of conflict. I was just talking with a client about this yesterday and bringing up some of the things that I'm going to talk with you about today. This is part of our free live streaming series here on Facebook. You can get all these videos right here on Facebook for the next week. Actually, for the next 4 weeks, they'll be up. And then we are also transferring our videos over to our YouTube page. So I would encourage you, if you didn't have an opportunity to catch the live stream, or if you know somebody who would benefit from viewing the live stream, I would really recommend having them go over to our YouTube page. So look for Human Services Consulting and Training on YouTube, and really go ahead and take a look at that and check that out. When you do that, please also forward that link to other people. They would love to be able to hear from you. They'd love to be able to know about this training. And it would be very helpful for them to grow, not only as remote leaders, but just leaders in general. All right, so when we think about conflict, when we think about how conflict happens, and we think about conflict on teams in general, we have to think about a number of different areas, all of which weave together, that people necessarily haven't had to think about individually, but as they are leading remote teams in our new remote environments, in our new remote workplaces, they probably should be thinking about quite a bit. So in what we're going to cover today, there's four main areas that we're going to cover today that leaders should really be focused on for leading remote teams through conflict effectively, right? So the first area is this idea of social proofing. Online environments have their own rules, the same ways in which face-to-face environments and face-to-face communication has its own rules. Every single virtual environment has its own rules, from video game environments all the way to social media environments. And every single social media environment has its own rules. So the rules of Facebook, this box that we're in right now, are different than the rules of Snapchat, which are different than the rules of Instagram, which are different than the rules of TikTok, which are different than the rules of YouTube, which are different than the rules of Google, which are different than the rules of, and I could go on and go on and go on with this. Every single platform has its own rules. Every single platform creates its own environment. And those rules of behavior, those rules of communication, those rules are reinforced through social proofing. And we're going to talk about what that means. That's a concept from a guy named Robert Cialdini, who wrote a great book, which I have on the shelf behind me. And I'm going to show you some books actually here in just a moment. But a great book that I have on the shelf behind me called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. And the idea of social proofing is not necessarily something that is new, but it is something that takes on a new feel inside of an online environment. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about today is conflict versus confrontation, right? That's the next thing that leaders need to know about. So the first thing is social proofing. The next thing is conflict versus confrontation. When you think about conflict, conflict is very often framed as disagreement or dispute. It's framed as a fight, which is fine. You know, that's the common definition. But we're going to talk about a little bit of a different one, particularly in a time of workplace disruption. Okay, conflict takes on a whole new meaning. It takes on a whole new flavor. It even takes on a whole new consistency when you think about it. And when you're leading remote teams, people who are working remotely primarily, conflict takes on its own rules in its own space. By the way, so does confrontation, which is not, just a preview of coming attractions, not the same as conflict. All right, the third area that we're going to cover is passive-aggressive communication, okay? Passive-aggressive communication is really interesting. Most of us have engaged in passive-aggressive communication or have been on the other end of passive-aggressive communication in face-to-face interactions. When you're talking about an online environment, though, passive-aggressive communication takes on a whole new meaning, particularly when I can just mute you like this. And you have no control over that at all. Now, all of a sudden, I'm in charge of what you're saying to me. And if we're in an environment where video is primary, if we're in an environment where voice is primary, if we're in an environment where writing is primary, all of these areas give individuals more control over the communication engagement and the communication interaction than they do the group or than they do another individual. This is a fascinating dynamic for leaders to focus on and for leaders to pay attention to, because it does create conflict. It does create passive-aggressive communication. And then the fourth and final area that we're going to talk about is our online tools. And so I've kind of mentioned some of these already. I mentioned platforms quite a bit, but I'm going to talk about the actual tools. So email is a tool. Video is a tool. Speaking voice is a tool, right? These are tools, right? And our tools actually define how we get into conflict and how we get out of it. When we're in face-to-face interactions, when we're in workplace environments where our platform is a cubicle, or our platform is our desk, or our platform is a physical office space, right? The tools then shift around and the usage of our tools shifts around. But when we're in an online environment, when we're in a virtual environment, our tools and the use of our tools shifts, right? The primacy of voice, the primacy of video, like what I'm doing right now, streaming this out, the primacy of email and the primacy of good writing become even more important than they are in environments where physically I can get up and go over to you and make a point, or where physically I can sit in a meeting with you and take measure and take your temperature, right? Determine your moods. Where in a physical environment, if I choose to turn my back and ignore you or mute you in a physical environment, that becomes really, really hard. And it becomes almost impossible to maintain. So we're going to talk about those four areas: social proofing, conflict versus confrontation, passive-aggressive communication, and online tools. Why is this important? Well, here's the reason why this is important. And by the way, we're going to do all that in about a half hour. Okay. Why is this important? Well, it's important because for the vast majority of us, as states shut down, as social distancing becomes the thing in order to stop the spread of novel coronavirus or COVID-19, as we attempt to, in the parlance of right now, flatten the curve, as we attempt to do that in the efforts to save millions of people's lives, or at least to prevent infection, as we do those things, more and more of us are going to be pushed into and already have been pushed into remote work environments. Again, I've said this before and I will say it again. Is there some work that cannot be done remotely? Yes. Is there essential labor where people are putting themselves in danger at a health level and are putting themselves at health risk for catching this virus? Yes. And many of us are doing remote work. Both of those things are not mutually exclusive. They actually work together. So this is the first reason why this is important. The second reason why this is important is online communication was evolving underneath people's noses. What's been fascinating to me is watching people come into online environments now on a day-to-day basis, even hour-to-hour basis, and watching platforms shift and move around. So people were always on, Reddit at like 10 o'clock at night. Now people are on Reddit all hours of the day. People were always on Facebook at work, either on their phones, right? Or quickly, click out of things. Or I got a webinar up here and I got it on the mobile phone there. People were always doing this. Now we're kind of in our homes. Some of us are in our third, fourth, fifth, in some cases, sixth, seventh, eighth week of working remotely. And now we're developing habits. Now we're developing behaviors. And habitual behaviors always lead to conflict with other people. You can write that down. Habitual behaviors always lead to conflict with other people. They always do. Because our behaviors, we pick for ourselves. We say, well, of course I would pick this behavior. Of course this is the right behavior. It works for me. But that behavior may not work for somebody else. We have plenty of new users to these tools. So this is where things that are happening right now that I'm hearing about, like Zoom bombing, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or getting into conflicts on Slack, right? Or utilizing email for instant communication, which isn't really what it was meant for. These kinds of users, right, who are new, quote unquote, to these platforms, new to these environments, who don't understand the rules, don't understand the social proofing, were told to use these platforms and now are struggling on a learning curve to get to where maybe other people have been for a while. These can also create conflicts on remote teams. And if you're in a hybrid situation where half of your team is essential and working in the office and the other half of the team is working remotely, the gap between those two teams, the gap in communication, is something that can also create conflict. So these are reasons why these are important. These are the things that we're going to talk about today. And we're going to wrap up in about another half hour, 20 minutes. I do encourage you, like I said, to go ahead and check out this training on YouTube. You can go back. We're taking all of our live streams, we're putting them on YouTube for free. So go check that out at the Human Services Consulting and Training page on YouTube. Also, I would encourage you to like, comment, and share this live stream around after it ends on Facebook. Share it to your LinkedIn profile, share it to folks via email. You can always grab the links. I'm very happy with doing that. And of course, with you doing that, and of course, if you would like to book us for trainings, right? If you would like for us to come and train with you remotely, we are available to do that. So please send us an email, info@hsconsultingandtraining.com, or send us an email to sales@hsconsultingandtraining.com, and we would be more than happy to work with you on figuring out how to do all this stuff with your team remotely that I'm talking about today. All right. So let's jump into the content a little bit. I do have my trusty whiteboard here. I also have some books that I want to recommend to you, but I'm going to take a little bit of a drink first. Anybody think it's been a rough last couple of days? Yeah, kind of. Not getting sickness, just been a rough couple of days. Been an emotional roller coaster right here. So I want to talk about some things. First off, though, as far as resources go. So the big resource on conflict is this one. This is the granddaddy of them all, Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In, by William Ury and Roger Fisher. You can pick this up on Amazon for about 2 cents now, or you can read it on audiobook. I would strongly recommend getting it on audiobook, Scribd, Audible, Blinklist, wherever you go to get your audiobooks and your audio tools. I recommend getting this book strongly. It helps you become a better negotiator. That'll help you with conflict, particularly with remote teams. The second book is this one. This has attained a lot of relevance in the last couple of years. I know some folks in the mediation world, Brad Heckman and others know this fellow. I know him. I've seen him speak. A guy named Chris Voss. Never Split the Difference. Negotiating as if your life depended on it. Sometimes when you're at work, it feels like your life depends on winning a negotiation. Sometimes it feels as though you're in a life-threatening situation. And sometimes that feeling isn't the right feeling. Sometimes that feeling isn't accurate at all. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss goes into how to really navigate conflicts in an effective way without doing maybe what Fisher and Uri recommend, which is why I recommend starting with this one and then moving to this one. All right. Then the third book that I would recommend, and I'm sure they're doing online trainings. I'm sure they're doing remote things right now, and you can always take advantage of their products and services. I highly recommend them. Is this book, Crucial Conversations: Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. Okay, by four folks: Carrie Patterson, Joseph Greene, Ron McMillan, and Al Swisler. This book started a revolution. So there's an entire series of these books floating around on Barnes & Noble. But of course, you can get this as an audiobook as well. Crucial Conversations will help you out, particularly on a remote team where sometimes we may have to have a difficult conversation that's not crucial, but we may have to have a crucial conversation that is difficult. And so Crucial Conversations is a great book. Once again, I would recommend picking all those up as audiobooks. So there's some big resources right up front. I, of course, have my trusty whiteboard here where I already had something written on here, which was the title, which I didn't end up using, Leading Remote Teams Through Conflict. All right, so we're going to get started on this. I'm going to write down a couple of things that we're going to cover. That way we can move quite quickly and get to some good stuff, some good content here. So when we talk about why this is important, right? The first thing that we have to discuss is this idea of social norms. All right, happy little trees, just like Bob Ross. Okay, Bob Rossing it up. All right, so social norms, but where? Online. Okay. Look, social norms online are radically different, and people who are now being pushed into online forums, being pushed into online spaces, may struggle with the new social norms that are in those kinds of spaces. Okay. Every online space has its own rules, as I was saying before. So again, video game spaces have rules, like Twitch has rules. Discord has rules. Let's see, platforms like OBS have rules, right? If you're a video gamer, you know what those platforms are. You know what I just said. And those rules dictate communication. Facebook has rules, right? So there's things that you do to honor the platform that are native, and then there's things that you can do that dishonor the platform. And this goes into a whole bunch of different areas, particularly for marketers. But for leaders in particular, they have to think about the platform that they're on in order to navigate effectively the kinds of conflicts they're in. So email, okay? Email behind a secured VPN has rules. There are rules to email that we follow at work or that we ignore, right? And those rules define where we go with a conflict. Look, a lot of the social norms online are driven by a lack of face-to-face communication. So right now, I've been talking for 18 minutes. I have a couple of viewers coming in ever so often, and that's okay. That's not the point of what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is there's a lack of face-to-face communication here. So I am actively imagining in my mind talking to a human being, actually a group of human beings in a room, and I'm imagining engaging with them as I've done live and in person for the last 7 years inside of this business model that now has had to transfer over to a remote space. And so now I'm pushing my emotions through the camera, right? I'm trying to speak to those groups of people out there, and I'm imagining how they're responding. That is what you have to do when you're in a space where face-to-face communication is lacking. Now, if you're in a space where you do have face-to-face, let's say I'm on a video and then I can see, like on Zoom, I can see all, 18 of you or 30 of you, right? Now the rules subtly shift. Because now it's less about me projecting forward my emotion, although that is important. It's actually more about me putting on a show because all of us grew up in a TV culture. That's the thing that we sometimes forget. We have boxes in our pocket called phones, and we have boxes in our houses called TVs. And TV culture over the last 120 years has, well, 120 years, yeah, 120 years has shaped us and shaped how we view media presentations. It's also shaped social norms. The second issue with social norms online. So the first issue is that social norms are driven by a lack of face-to-face communication online. And leaders very often don't know how to navigate that. The second area is that social norms online are driven by a lack of empathy sometimes. You see this in trolling and gaslighting. You see this in spam comments and at the furthest end, doxing people. If you don't know what doxing is, you can Google it, and it goes in all kinds of different directions. But doxing basically means I find out all of your information, who you are online by tracking all your clicks, and then I send like pizza to your house because I find out where you live. I find out that behind BarbaraBoy75@yahoo.com is a woman who has 4 kids or a man who has a divorce and 5 kids, and then I start messing with you. That's doxing. I find out your private information and I put it online. And that's an interesting term, right? Private versus online, private versus public. That gets into the concepts that are explored somewhat in Yohari's window. So a lot of these conflicts online, a lot of social norming online is driven by a lack of empathy, because if I can't see you, I can't connect with you. Anonymity is a killer. And in conflict, anonymity ensures that a conflict will continue because I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you empathy if I can't see you. I don't owe you empathy if I don't even know you. You're not my friend. You're just somebody who's a name on a screen. There's no connection there. All right. And then social norms online are also driven by a desire for instant gratification. So a lot of these platforms that we are using, even email, interestingly enough, is driven primarily by speed of communication. And I've said this before when we're talking about customer service, and I said it before when we were talking about emotional intelligence in leading remote teams. If you're leading a remote team, one of the things I would recommend strongly is prioritizing slowing down communication, de-emphasizing speed. The reason why is because the platforms that we are using, and I don't care if it's email or Slack or Zoom, I don't care if it's Facebook Live, Snapchat, TikTok, I don't care if it's LinkedIn streaming, I don't care if it's Facebook Live streaming, YouTube Live streaming, all of these platforms, all of these tools, right, were built to instantly appeal to people. They were built to create a dopamine hit. They were built as environments where eating the cookie and eating the marshmallow and getting the high and then moving on to the next high and the next high and the next high and the next high and the next high creates addiction. It also creates more conflict, and conflict creates addiction. And thus you stay on the platform longer. And thus your eyeballs are there longer. And thus I can put more ads in front of you and justify the existence of a free platform that you're not paying to be on. By the way, Netflix operates this way too. So do many streaming services, the ones you do pay for and the ones you don't. Quibi is really interesting. They're a new streaming service out there, 10-minute shows. That's ultimate instant gratification. I never thought I would see that. Well, no, I thought I would see it. I just thought it would be a while. And it turned out to be, well, instant. So the social norms that are online are driven by a lack of face-to-face communication. They are driven by a lack of empathy very often for other people because we can't see them, because we're anonymous. And of course, driven by a desire for instant gratification, which is built into the platforms themselves. Now we got to talk about conflict. So when we talk about conflict, that's our second area. And conflict is really interesting. The way that people think about conflict, the way that people perceive conflict, the way that people absorb conflict and go through conflict in a face-to-face interaction is really quite fascinating, and it becomes even more fascinating at scale in a remote environment, right? With remote workers or with the virtual environment, like if you're on a Zoom call or if you're in an instant messaging situation or if you're even on an email. And so I want to talk about two areas very quickly, and you could read about more of these in the book, or you can just look online. I want to talk about the difference between these two things. Right? Let me cap my trusty marker there. So I want to talk about the difference between these two things. Conflict versus confrontation, right? So when we think about conflict, many of us have the idea that conflict is only about a dispute, right? Conflict is only about an actual, visceral, immediate disagreement. Yes, and there's a lot of other stuff built into conflict. Conflict is about communication modes. Conflict is about opinions. Conflict is about, well, not about, but conflict is driven by emotions, right? Conflict is driven by ideas. Conflict is driven by opinions. Conflict is driven by a whole lot of things. But the nature of conflict itself, very often we confuse the driver of the conflict with the engine of conflict itself, right? And the driver is not the engine. The gasoline isn't the engine. And this is going to be a confusing concept, but don't worry. We've got plenty of resources on the HS Consulting and Training website to help you navigate through conflict. And my larger point is this. Conflict itself is a process of change. You may want to write that down. Conflict is a process of change. No great change, not one, happens without conflict. No great change. You can name conflicts in your life that have occurred, and every single one of those conflicts has led to change. Great for you, by the way, may not mean great for me. And when we're thinking about leading remote teams, when we're thinking about teams that are engaged right now and working remotely, the greatest change possible has already occurred in moving from a face-to-face physical environment to moving to remote. Conflict has already begun. You've already got the seeds for it built in. Confrontation, on the other hand, though, confrontation is a communication act. Confrontation may escalate to conflict. Confrontation may move to a conflict spot. Confrontation might even drive itself over between two parties. But remember, escalation is always a choice, and navigating conflict effectively means understanding that confrontation is a communication act. It merely is an act of saying to the other party, hey, something's wrong here and we need to fix it. Will you help? Most of us don't frame a confrontation that way, though. We frame a confrontation from an adversarial stance, thus ensuring that we will have conflict. When we think about conflict versus confrontation, there's a second area that seems kind of sort of obvious to go along with that. And it's actually point number 3 for today. So the third area is this idea of this kind of communication. So it's this idea, passive aggressive communication, all right? So when we think about passive aggressive communication, when we think about sort of how long people will, or not long, but how well people engage with each other, that mute button online is very easy to use. Passive aggressive communication in remote teams shows up in the form of not answering that email. It also shows up in the form of going and creating another platform or another room where people can talk about other people without people coming in and seeing that they're talking about them. It shows up in the form of shadowing, or you see this on Twitter, subtweeting, right? Mentioning somebody in a tweet without directly talking to them. Passive aggressive communication online also shows up in the form of muting, video, or muting a phone call, muting somebody on a microphone who's on the other end of a Zoom call. That's passive aggressive communication. Passive aggressive communication can also show up if your organization is video first and is requiring everybody to have video in order to do your work, but you've got some folks on your team that just can't quite afford a webcam, or they always have trouble getting it installed, or They always say, well, I just don't look good enough for video, so we're just going to do the voice thing. That's passive-aggressive communication. Now, does all passive-aggressive communication indicate that conflict is about to happen? No. Does all passive-aggressive communication indicate that conflict is on the rise or is about to show up? No. Sometimes passive-aggressive communication is merely just the normal communication style that a person has transferred to this new platform. That's it. Okay? But you have to pay attention to passive-aggressive communication because, see, here's the thing that happens. If I am one member of your team and I am totally, completely invested in making sure the team works, and I've got another team member who can't get their webcam to work or can't answer the email or is sub-messaging me in some kind of way or puts me on mute all the time, if any one of those actions happen, because these platforms favor instant gratification and they are driven by a lack of empathy and a lack of face-to-face, there's actually no loss to me from my perspective. Even though we are at work, even though we are getting paid, there's no there's no loss to me from my perspective from engaging in a conflict with that person, whether it be a conflict using these tools, a conflict based on avoidance, a conflict based on direct confrontation, a conflict that comes out of accommodation, or even a conflict that comes out of collaboration. There's no loss to me. There's no penalty. There's no downside, because after all, we're all just virtually here. We're all in our homes. It's okay. This is the way human behavior works, right? This is the way we sort of manufacture our behavior in these online spaces, and passive-aggressive communication can sometimes be a killer. All right, number 4, the last area. And we're gonna close. I'm gonna give you some tips here in the next 9 minutes or so that I think are going to help you. And then we're gonna close out, and I'm gonna encourage you to check us out a little bit further on YouTube. Go and check out our website. And please connect with me on social. Let me know all the different ways that I can help you out, okay? Navigating these tough times, helping you survive and make your remote teams better. All right, number 4, online tools. I think I mentioned this over and over and over again, and it bears repeating yet one more time. Our tools that we have, that we are using, our online tools, are the ones that are sometimes driving conflict because people don't know how to use them. And it's not a matter of they're ignorant or they can't learn. That's not it. What it is the learning curve from going from in-person to virtual is difficult for people who either have never done it before, have resisted doing it, or haven't had to do it, and now they've been pushed into it. And like I said, there are some areas of our country geographically where people have been doing this work for 8 weeks now. People are doing this work for 6 weeks now. There's other areas geographically in this country that have been impacted by novel coronavirus or COVID-19, where this work is just starting. At every single one of those spaces, I don't care whether you've been doing it for 8 weeks or you're just starting it today, this week, every single one of those spaces in that gap of the last 8 weeks, now conflict has an opportunity to arise. Online tools like Zoom are now being used and are now being bombed, right, by people coming in and hijacking the host, coming in and inserting things like pornography or inserting things like bad language or bad code, because Zoom as a service is getting overwhelmed and can't really monitor all of that. Plus, individual hosts have to be savvy for how the platform works. And if this is the first time you're using a platform like Zoom or GoToMeeting or Cisco WebEx or freemeeting.com or any of the other services that are out there, if you're using the services for the first time, you may not be aware of all the intricacies that other people who have been using these for a while are aware of. So it's a learning curve thing. Second thing is, the second kind of online tool is Slack or instant messaging. In our brains, when we hear the word instant and message, we think instant means like this, and we confuse the speed of response with the speed of the message. Slack very often, can be used just like any other direct messaging tool quite negatively for sniping and snarking at people. It can also be used to engage in passive-aggressive communication. Then there's the 2 biggest ones that are used at work, okay? So email, right? And I would strongly recommend, if you're leading a remote team, that you slow down all of your communication and prioritize email. But prioritize well-written, concise, greatly worded emails. And actually, we're going to do a video stream in the next couple of weeks on, I'm going to teach you, or I'm going to talk a little bit with you about how to write better emails, how to engage in better correspondence in a remote environment, because writing becomes the coin of the realm. And then, of course, there's the phone. Alexander Graham Bell's greatest invention, right? The phone, right? That gave us all of this, right? The phone that actually linked into the internet, right? The phone that allows us to now watch YouTube videos. The phone that allows me, the phone. Phone's a great tool. The concept of the phone is really easy. I talk to somebody who's not there. It's a very simple concept. And yet, think about that. I talk to someone who's not physically in the room with me. For the first 5,000 years of human history, all we did was talk to people in rooms. And if you wanted to talk to somebody who wasn't in a room, you either had to stand up on a box or on a rock, and you had to shout your message, or you had to, gather people together in a room, stand up on a box or a rock and shout your message. And now with a phone, you don't have to do that. So phones, we're fairly familiar with those, right? What are all the ways we passive aggressively communicate with phones? We mute people. We put them on hold. We let the music play in the background. We drive people crazy. And if we're providing customer service, we know that the phone is a great tool for connecting. It's a great tool for emotionally connecting via voice, but it can also be a great tool for disengaging and disconnecting. So our online tools include things like the video ones like Zoom, okay, or GoToMeeting, the video-based tools where we can maybe sort of simulate face-to-face a little bit, but not really have that thing. Then Slack and email, which are about written communication, both instant and slow, which I would argue email needs to be slow, and maybe we shouldn't be as instant as we are with Slack or with instant messaging tools. And then we have the phone, which prioritizes voice. And by the way, some of those video tools prioritize voice as well, so they act as virtual phones, which again is technology we're extremely familiar with. Some solutions. I've given you a lot of information. I know I have, which is why I would encourage you again, check out this video on YouTube, go back, rewind, watch again. We're going to have it posted on our Facebook page for quite some time. So please take the opportunity to watch this stream again. Okay. And again, share it around with folks who you know. Okay. So some solutions, right? I'm going to write this down because this is simple and yet complex. And you can do this, by the way, in face-to-face, but it just feels awkward. Whereas in an online communication, in order to manage conflict effectively, this is probably your best tool. And I'm going to break this one down really simply like this. So pause, breathe, speak, breathe, pause again. Okay, let me break this one down. So when we are communicating online, when there's a possibility of conflict, right? When the process of change is upon us, when there's even a confrontation occurring in an online forum, our first step is to pause. Stop. Don't do anything. Breathe. That way you're thinking rather than acting with emotion, rather than acting out of your amygdala. Then speak. Speak in measured tones. Speak in measured language. Think about each one of your words as they are coming out of your mouth. Breathe again. And pause again, allowing the other speaker to respond or react. When you do pause, breathe, speak, breathe, pause, when you do this in order, does it seem weird and awkward? Yeah, because you would never do that in face-to-face communication because you have all the textural, there's that word again, only took 39 minutes to get in here. There's that textural moments that are happening, right? That you can absorb, where you can absorb information from them to guide the communication. But now if you have interfaces between you and them, like a video interface or a phone interface or an email interface, you don't have those moments. You can't pick up that texture. So you've got to be in control of your own communication before you even engage in a conflict. Pause, breathe, speak, pause, or sorry, breathe, pause. Okay? Breathing and pausing and speaking. Breathing, pausing, and speaking. Think of it that way. That's number one. Number two, my second big tip is this one. Tip number two, okay? Assume everybody's making assumptions online, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, most of us assume negative rather than assuming positive. So assume best intentions of the other party, right? Look, if we assume a negative, you're going to get a negative. If you assume a positive, or at least the best, you're going to get something better. And you're going to open up the opportunity for people to actually engage with you in a way that really matters. Assume people's best intentions, right? Don't assume a negative, assume a positive. It'll help you navigate the conflict sphere a little bit more in a little bit more of a healthy fashion. All right, number three. Our third big point is this. By the way, when we assume best intentions, just as a side note, when we assume best intentions, instant gratification kind of goes away. The desire for instant gratification goes away, and we begin to engage with empathy. All right, number three, our third big point is this. I don't like this marker. I'm throwing it away. Okay. Number three, bargain over this thing here. I'm not going to say the word, I'm just going to point it out. Number three, bargain over subtext. When we're engaging in talking with individuals online, we're engaging with conflict online with remote teams, we want to bargain over subtext, because what that will do is it'll short circuit passive aggressive communication. Bargaining over subtext short circuits passive aggressive communication. Most of us in face-to-face communications try to do both at the same time. We try to bargain over the context, the actual thing that's being talked about, and we try to bargain over subtext, the emotional stuff underneath. Instead, we should reverse it in an online situation, because the thing that becomes primary is that subtext. Context almost becomes, I won't say unimportant, but the balance shifts, right? So yeah, sure, there's what we're talking about, but there's all the other stuff underneath. And we got to bargain over subtext in a conflict scenario. And by the way, in face-to-face, this becomes a little bit harder, but with online tools and an online environment, even in a remote environment, it actually becomes easier to bargain over subtext, because people don't have that face-to-face. They don't have that interpersonal interaction thing going, and thus their level of vulnerability is a little bit lower. All right, number four, the last point. And this is just something in general that I've had to have ground into me over the last few days and in different contexts. And I'm an impatient person, so this is really one for me. Be patient. We've got to have empathy with folks, because everyone is learning. Everyone is new to this space. I was just on a Zoom call last night with a local religious organization that I'm a part of, and you know, the call had like 22 people on it, and not everybody was talking over each other. It wasn't that kind of thing, but you could tell the person who was running it had never really run a group that large, and it wasn't a bad thing. It was just a learning curve thing. So we were patient. Be patient. Everyone is learning. Look, are we going to get to a space where these kinds of communications and these kinds of spaces are going to be normal? Yes, I believe so. I do actually believe that remote work and these kinds of remote environments, the longer we go on and on with them, the more and more people are going to become comfortable with them. And as people become more comfortable with not only a remote environment, but in working on a remote team with remote work, the more and more people become comfortable, the more and more bad or ingrained habits begin to come out. Human beings have behaviors that are inbuilt, and this current disruption has moved our behaviors slightly, but we're going to go back to mean. We're going to go back to what we always were. We're going to go back to our average or to our common. And all we're going to do is lay these tools on top of that and engage in a new way. Well, actually engage in an old way with new tools. When you're leading remote teams through conflict, these are things you need to pay attention to as a manager and a leader. Now, there are some other more granular things and textural things in there, but it would take me way too long to go into all of those. If you'd like to find out more about what we do for conflict management, please check out our workshops page on the hsconsultingandtraining.com page. If you'd like a bite-sized version of this that your team can go through right now, we offer our flagship product, LeadingKeys. So please go check that out at www.leadingkeys.com and schedule a demo with my sales team. Okay, let's go ahead and schedule a demo. Just click on the link and we'll be willing to talk with you and find out what it is that you need to help your remote team survive and thrive, not only in a space of workplace disruption, but also in a space where this disruption now is the normal and where conflict can arise and where you need tools as a leader in order to manage those conflicts better. Please feel free to connect with me here on Facebook. Please feel free to follow the Human Services Consulting and Training page. Check out this re-recording or check out this recording on YouTube in a couple of days. And I look forward to seeing you in the next week when we'll talk about another topic around leading remote teams through workplace disruption. Thank you for your time this morning. I appreciate it.